How's it going, everyone? This is Andy from PSR, and today we have Samir Civic here down with me. Today we're going to be doing a valve adjustment as well as changing out his spark plugs. And no, not butt plugs, spark plugs. Okay, so first things first is we're going to want to take the valve cover off. Now on Samir's car, it's going to be a lot easier because he just has this little hose that seems to just be connected there. That should be pretty easy. And then these spark plug wires just pop out. Just pull them out, get them out of your way. And if you can't remember which order they go back in, you can just put a piece of tape around this with the cylinder, which it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you can just see that the longest one can only fit over here, second longest here, etc. Let's get this hose off. And now just take the bolts out. For some reason that last one was ridiculously tight. But now we should be able to just pull it towards you, give it a little wiggle wiggle side to side, and boom, here we are. And now we're going to want to take off this timing cover. Okay, so you just have a bolt here, and you kind of have to finesse out of the way because this part right here goes around the dipstick tube. There we go. Now let's remove the wheel. So basically the reason why we wanted to remove that wheel is so that it would be much easier getting this contraption in. Now you don't need as long of a bar. I just have it and it makes it slightly easier. But basically we put a 17mm socket on the crankshaft so that we can spin the engine, because we have to spin the engine to TDC of whatever cylinder that we're going to be adjusting. So let's get it to a top dead center cylinder 1. And these engines spin counterclockwise. Yes, that's important. So now if we look right there, we have an up mark. We have that tiny slit in between those two little teeth on the cam gear. And if you come around the back side, you have the same mark right there on this metal part. I just put my feeler gauge there or something flat or whatever to line it up perfectly with that, because it's kind of hard to tell exactly where it is, but that's a good trick to get you to top dead center cylinder 1. And remember guys, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, because on that side is where the transmission is, and wherever the transmission is the back of the engine. So this is the front of the engine. But now it's time to actually get into adjusting the valves. So we're going to start with the exhaust side because it's super easy to show you. We're going to be cylinder 1, exhaust side. And if you don't know how to tell, you have your exhaust manifold and you have your intake manifold. So of course the exhaust valves are on this side, intake valves are on that side. And for clearance, the intake side is 0.18 to 0.22 millimeters. This is going to be the feeler gauge that's directly in the center of those measurements. And the exhaust side is 0.23 to 0.27 millimeters. And this is the center measurement for the exhaust side. Now keep in mind, you don't need fancy feeler gauges. I honestly just like having the different color handles, because when I'm doing these at work, I can just go boom, green intake, boom, red exhaust. It makes it a lot easier to differentiate them instead of having to read the numbers every time. And also, before you're doing this, you want the engine to be cold or less than 100 degrees on the head. So you can just grab an infrared thermometer, point at the nut, we're at 70.5. If you point at the head, we're at 71. This car's been sitting here for a while, so I know that it's good, but obviously if you're doing this warm, before you even take the valve cover off, just put a fan over, like a box fan, or get a jumper relay to run the radiator fan so that it will cool off the coolant. The reason why you want to be top dead center on the cylinder is because that's when none of the valves are being pushed open. Like if we go over to cylinder 2 and we wiggle this rocker, nothing, right? It's pushing down on the exhaust valves. If we go here, you know, we have clearance, which means there's no pressure being applied to either intake or exhaust valves, which is where you're supposed to adjust them. Okay, so you're gonna want to take your exhaust feeler gauge to the exhaust side and fit it in between the rocker and the top of the valve. So as you can see, That is quite a lot of space. Like there's absolutely no resistance there. You know, there's no struggle at all. So that means the gap is too big. So now the way you loosen and tighten these is with a valve adjust tool. So it's a fairly simple concept. You have the center adjuster and the locking nut. This part of the tool loosens the lock nut. The screwdriver adjusts the adjustment screw. So I personally like leaving the feeler gauge in there, and then I'm gonna try and do this so you guys can see it. You put that on there, you put the screwdriver in the groove. Sorry guys, I had to loosen that off camera. That one was really freaking tight. But now that we're loose, we're gonna leave that hanging there, move this back and forth in between the gap, and then tightening. But see, now we're too tight. Notice how it's a real struggle to push in and out. So we're just gonna wanna back off a hair and then tighten up that lock nut. And then it's just a process of finding the perfect spot. Okay guys, now this is how I was taught for it to be. You wanna be able to slide it in pretty dry. You know, it's like have some drag. You know, it's not, if I don't support the back there, it doesn't really want to go in. You know, I have to do that. But if I put my finger on the back of it, keeping it straight, it has some resistance and some coming out, right? You obviously don't want it so tight that you can't pull it out, and you don't want it so loose, like here. See how easy this one is to go in and out of? And that's with oil, so that's actually helping it a little bit. But then on this one, it's just slightly harder. And guys, remember, the reason why we do the center measurement anyways is because it's all a feeling thing. You're almost never going to get all 16 of these perfectly exactly the same. So that's why you do the middle measurement. So that way, if you're slightly too tight or slightly too loose, you're still most likely within the specification. So just make all of them like that. Like you'll be able to feel it. You don't want it to be too rough going in or too loose going in. But alright guys, now that I showed you the one, I'm just gonna throw you on a time lapse and I'll show you which way the cam gear has to be for the other cylinders, and I'll stop the time lapse if any of them are so bad that it's worth noting. So far on cylinder 1, they aren't too terrible, but I'm hoping to find one that's really tight or really loose just to show you guys what that looks like. But let's go. Okay guys, so on cylinder 3, this intake valve is pretty loose. We got oil on the feeler gauge. And if we go, we can just slide it in. You see how easy that is? Like I'm using 2 fingers very loosely on this gauge, and it just goes right in. That is way too loose. For comparison, I just adjusted the exhaust side. See that? So I have to somewhat force it in and somewhat force it out. For reference, the exhaust feeler gauge can almost fit in between this gap, which is no good considering it's, you know, 25% bigger. But yeah, just wanted to show you guys the difference there. that's how cylinder 1 should look. That's how cylinder 3 should look. That's how cylinder 4 should look. And that's how cylinder 2 should look. Okay guys, now that we got all of the valves adjusted, it's time to properly torque all of the lock nuts. On the D16Y7, it says 18 Newton meters or 13 foot-pounds. And on the D16Y5s and Y8s, it's 20 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds. This is a Y7, so we're gonna go with 18 Newton meters. And before you tighten up the lock nuts, make sure to note where all of the adjuster screws are, because I've had it happen where you go to tighten the lock nut and the adjuster screw actually moves and messes up your valve adjust. Okay guys, that's how you perform a valve adjust. Now, I'm not going to be assembling it because I have a timing belt to do later, as long as the parts come in. So I'm going to walk you through how to finish it up, because you may not know. So at this time, you're gonna wanna replace your valve cover gasket, right? You're here, it's like a $40 part from Honda. You might as well just do it. And something that's really important is you wanna get Honda Bond and put Honda Bond in the corners. As you can see, someone did it here and there prior, and just put them on every corner. And if you're doing it on an engine with seams, like with a timing cover with a chain, make sure to put Honda Bond where those meet as well. From the factory, there should be Honda Bond. If there isn't, it's kind of a big problem. But you just want to put a glob there so that when you tighten up the cover, this corner of the valve cover gasket pushes it in and spreads it out. Now obviously you don't need too much. You don't want to have any of it going into the engine. If you get a tiny bit, it's not going to kill the engine. So, you know, don't freak out if you get a tiny bit. But you basically just want it to smash real nice, just like this example here. And then when you're putting the valve cover gasket back on, it's good to replace these seals. What I do is I just grab a little pocket screwdriver, put it on the edge like so, tap it in with a hammer, and then just pry it out. That's a good way to get those out without damaging it too bad. And then when you're putting it back on, sometimes these don't like to seat, so I like to use silicone spray. This has been a good spray for me because it doesn't just mist it, it soaks it and keeps the silicone spray on there for a while. Again, that's not gonna damage your engine or hurt your engine by any means. And then when you're putting the valve cover back on, that is the torque sequence. You're gonna wanna make sure to follow that. And it's 10 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds. And then obviously put your spark plug wires back in. Make sure to put your timing cover on. And when you put your timing cover on, make sure to put it on nicely because it's supposed to be a weather sealant from the timing belt. And then obviously make sure to put this hose back on too. And then you should be done if that's all you're doing. But again, guys, that's how you do a valve adjustment on a D series. And you know, guys, like just this valve adjust doesn't take a whole lot of money. You could buy a set of feeler gauges from O'Reilly's for like 10 bucks. And you don't have to get a Honda valve cover gasket. You can get an aftermarket one. As long as it seals from the oil, you know, that's all that matters. You could probably do this for like $60, buying tools, buying parts. You know, it's instead of paying a shop, you know, however much, $400, $500, sometimes they charge that much, if not more. You can do it yourself. And when you're filming car content, specifically showing people how to do a certain repair, it usually takes longer. I did this repair faster than the book time, even while filming. So, like I said, it's ridiculously easy. It'd be something good to try yourself. And then as you may notice, I got a giant lighting upgrade because I'm always filming at night. I almost never have time to film during the day, especially now that it's starting to become winter. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but the firing order is 1, 3, 4, 2. Like in the directions, it wants you to go to 1 and then spin it all the way to 4 and then spin it back to 3 and then to 2. But then you'd be doing almost 2 full rotations of the engine instead of just going 1, 3, 4, 2. I don't know why they did it that way. But alright, if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one.